Maybe I'm being alarmist or overly negative, but I'm in a mood right now where I feel like media is finally and truly cooked. I once saw a post some years ago that said as soon as we all started collectively referring to art as content and using words like consume to describe it, we were on the downward trajectory towards art being methodically replaced by jingling keys. I just keep looking everywhere. Everywhere I look, I just see, the death of a literate society, right? Some 70% of college undergrads can't write a paper without generative AI. Asmongold is more searched on YouTube than music. Live-action Lilo and Stitch made $100 million opening box office. This is it. We're in the after times. Sinners is literally still running in local theaters, and yet I can still barely remember that good things even exist in this world. So why am I currently so depressed to the point that I've lost the ability to feel joy or believe in the power of media? I'm glad you asked. Here's my non-spoiler review of the 100-line Last Defense Academy. The thing about a game that's well over 100 hours of active playtime is my relationship to this experience has undergone so many bumps and changes that I have no idea where to begin. And I have no idea how to convey this feeling to people who have not reached this emotional stage or who are not on this specific emotional journey. This game, 100-line Last Defense Academy, is maybe the worst game I've ever played in my entire life. And that's hard to quantify. There are games that are broken and borderline unplayable. There are games with zero entertainment value. There are games that don't even really qualify as entertainment, that are basically just like scams, like all those sports games or phone games that keep getting republished. And I still think that in terms of trying to be a real video game, this is one of the most bafflingly misguided attempts I've ever seen. Now, it's well known that Kodaka Uchikoshi and, their other fucking team leads funded this project themselves and supposedly went into personal debt to make it, or put the company into debt. I don't feel some sort of animosity towards the concept of the development of this game. I thought to myself about whether or not I want this game to sell badly so that they face real financial consequences for making a game this bad, and I don't really care. It's not about that. I think that you shouldn't play this game, but I don't really care if it's a financial success or not. I think this game is just such an insult to the entire craft of storytelling, game development, just media in general, that I feel personally offended on behalf of my own self-respect as a human being, on behalf of my love for real, art and entertainment, that I think that any sentiment that this game is somehow not terrible or is somehow good is an incomprehensible and unforgivable atrocity against concepts like truth and meaning. There comes to a point where a difference of opinion is more like a fundamental comprehension of reality. Do we both agree that, murdering your neighbor is wrong? I don't have polite disagreements with Nazis. I don't have polite disagreements with anti-vaxxers. There are just things that are understood to be true by normal people with basic morals and basic critical thinking, in that they understand what does and does not exist in the real world, and I struggle to view liking this game as anything but a similar level of an abject rejection of truth and reality. If the word art means anything at all, if words have meanings, if what we see with our eyes and what we hear with our ears is real and has any meaning, then anime fanboys are an affront to all of that. I never do this. I normally just, begrudge shit taste and just explain why it doesn't really make sense to praise this thing. I normally don't care at all if people like something bad or have an interpretation of reality where they see it as good or whatever. When I hate something that other people like, normally it's not the thing or the fact that they like it that even bothers me that much. Well, it depends, but it's just that those situations tend to come with preemptive defensiveness, so I have to see a bunch of these people with the shit taste, liking the mediocre thing, that are saying that it's actually wrong and uninformed to dislike that thing. Now, of course, that type of defensiveness just becomes like a pointless circle, it starts nowhere. So I try to avoid that pitfall whenever I can, because it's literally pointless bickering. And most of the time, the things people get defensive about are not even that bad. They just, they're usually just drastically overhyped things that where they take something pretty decent, but they say it's amazing, best in the world, and it's silly to bicker over, hyperbole or even just someone getting swept up in the vibes of the moment. This situation is different than that. It is unprecedented. I have never said this for any other piece of media ever, on this channel or in person to anyone. If you tell yourself that you like this game, I do think that you are subhuman. I do think that you are insulting all good things in this world. And I do think that your words and your actions collectively damage the planetary concept of art and of the human experience. I do stay up awake at night wondering why we live in a world where someone like you is allowed to vote or have a driver's license. Okay, that scares me. Now, I'll talk about the game in a minute, but I want to posit some Reddit armchair psychologist theories for why people might convince themselves that a rancid piece of shit is somehow good. There's this serious medical condition known as liking anime. It has no known cure. It is fatal. Antibiotics, they don't even really treat the symptoms that well. Much like how there's an implied cultural distinction between, people who just like movies and film bros, quote-unquote, the concept of anime fan has less to do with the medium of anime and more to do with a certain selection of recognizable traits that are incredibly obnoxious online. Anime fan condition I see as the evil cousin of autism. It's all of us good autistic people, right? We're playing with cards and we looking at pictures of trains and whatever, and all the bad autistic people fall into the anime rabbit hole and they never come back up to reality. An anime fan is someone who is so disconnected from normal human social behavior that they interpret anime characters as behaving reasonably and realistically, with reasonable words, emotions, and actions. An anime fan is someone who doesn't interpret things via subtlety so they feel that much more confident in consuming media where every important piece of information is shoved in their face as hard as possible, and where all characters scream their current emotions in plain language all the time so the socially inept autists can understand them. An anime fan is someone with a certain cultural view of media that makes them extremely resistant to critical thinking, where they just decide to like something and then only interpret it through the lens that it must be good inherently. An anime fan has a memory condition that makes it so they can consume the exact same thing over and over and over, infinite times, without getting bored of it or diminishing their enjoyment of it. The opposite, in fact, is true. An anime fan has convinced themselves to celebrate cliches and to celebrate generic repetition of the same tropes, the same scenarios, and the same concepts, etc., forever. They think it is so funny and so cool to just shovel down the same slop down their throats forever. They feel a sense of pride over their ability to identify patterns, quote-unquote, that us literate people recognize those patterns as lazy, shitty, repetitive tropes, used to avoid needing to have any original ideas or put in the effort to construct an actual vision. Instead, relying on consumers to be so brain-rotted that they can be appeased by just waving a flashlight in front of their faces really fast and call it writing. The worst thing about anime fans is that they're not actually autistic. Real autists often do gravitate to anime. There are good reasons why it's jokingly referred to as the autistic medium, but the anime fans that I am describing are not like that. They are normal people who could have been functional adults, okay, if they consumed media that was suited for them if they read a book once, or if they continued to escalate in the depth and complexity of their intake, if they did things that engage their brains in non-reactive formats. But instead, they consumed anime, because anime is so fucking easy to consume. And they did it so much that they rewired their own brains into having all of the shortfalls of autism with none of the benefits. They convinced themselves that a total lack of tact, prose, effort, or subtlety are good things. They can no longer identify normal human behavior. They've developed delusional mental gymnastics to justify why witless garbage is good, and they've lost the ability to even think that bad things might be bad. They consider themselves critical thinkers because they take things way more seriously than is warranted or earned by the storycraft involved, right? They'll look at Darumi screaming about a killing game for the 12th time and take it totally seriously and have like a pseudo-serious conversation about the implications of that. But they're treating underwritten, underdeveloped, cliched trash as emotional or compelling. But if the game were to tell them that 2 + 2 = 17, they would never stop to notice that maybe that doesn't sound quite right. They don't have the critical thinking capacity for that. They'd sooner make excuses for why 2 + 2 = 17 actually makes perfect sense, because the game told them that 2 + 2 = 17, therefore it must make sense. They invent kiddie pool level goalposts for the things that they consume in order to create justifications for heaping praise onto talentless dog shit, saying things like, wow, that character didn't even say a single early 2010s Reddit meme. That entire conversation. Wow, that truly realistic dialogue. That's incredible. Incredible writing. They allow their own standards to diminish to infinite degrees in every capacity of consumption. They write fanfiction in their own heads and pretend like the things that they made up actually count as contributions from the story. And thus they find ways to entertain themselves while still claiming that it's totally the game and its quality that is entertaining them and not just their own rancid imaginations. They spend most of their mental energy inventing a version of the story that they could accept as making sense instead of thinking about concepts like writing or being critical of the rhetoric, the prose, the theming, whatever. Like, okay, go and look at the amount of cope that you see with shit like the Imakako section of the initial 100 days. So many mentally cooked out, fucked up anime fanboys are defending it by inventing fake stories in their heads about, like, how Ima always wanted Kako to stand up for herself and totally created the situation to somehow inspire her to be more independent, or anime fans accepting the game's stated logic that Ima can't be bad or abusive because he loves his sister, or stating that the game itself isn't misogynistic because Kako does join the team, ignoring that the game assumes the logic of a misogynist as standard and only allows her to join the team as a twist on that expectation. They just cope and cope and cope and cope and cope. And that's a case where their brains, something in their brains is primally recognizing the fact that something is wrong, but they're struggling to find a way to deny it. But most of the time, they don't even reach that point. They just make up fan fiction in their heads and then act like that's a product of the game's excellence. I see this a lot with streamers, but like, when all of the game's jokes, almost all the game's jokes are extremely blunt and repetitive and unfunny, but Stream Chat can still, like, joke around with the game and make memes out of the shared experience of playing the game, it can trick some people into thinking that the game is funny, or that the game is as funny as the community's jokes that were derived from playing it. There's just so many methods that people can use to watch this slop that, let's be clear, a middle schooler could have and would have written all of this, but convince themselves that they're having fun and derive from that fun an idea that the game must somehow be good. Like, okay, I enjoy drunk bad movie night as much as the next guy, but I wouldn't then turn around and argue that those bad movies are actually good and well made because I was drunk and laughed a lot when I watched them. Also, they just do laugh at terrible, witless comedy. Like, okay, I have to begrudgingly sit and listen to slop on TV shows like
Big Bang Theory or Cobra Kai whenever I want to spend time with my parents because they watch that dog shit because they're like middle-aged white suburbanites. But I really feel like if anime like realized the infinite potential of hurting their brain-dead audiences with a laugh track in addition to what they already have, they would unlock the infinite money cheat for reality. Because watching someone laugh at the 65th time that Darumi says that they should do a killing game makes me want to blow my fucking head off.
So, without specific spoilers, I'll say that our initial experience with the game was mid, basically. We were expecting the game to be at least kind of bad from the get-go, from long ago. We were anticipating it to be something like Zero Time Dilemma bad, where it's like trashy and the story sucks, and it's filled with a lot of bad ideas that should have been thought out better, but it's like a funny, bad movie. We finished the whole game in 140 hours. Now that is a serious rush job, actually. We were blazing through it at many places and through the entire time. If you played at a normal pace, you'll probably get between 200 to 250 hours. And if you're like some kind of fucking streamer or something that has to voice every single line of dialogue, you'll probably get like 300 hours. Initial impressions, or more, probably. Initial impressions for the first 30 hours for us was kind of middling. Waffling between mediocre and boring was our impression. The game doesn't have a lot of good stuff in it per hour of playtime, so it's mostly a drag to play. A lot of the entertainment value at this point in the game is probably theoretical. As in, you hope that the story will eventually get to something interesting, because, you know, mystery stories are kind of like that. But in the moment, you're kind of just theorizing what the game might do in the future, and that's kind of all you have to entertain yourself. If you want to consider theoretical entertainment as an actual form of legitimate entertainment, I can understand that, that's fine. I still don't think that you can claim that a game is good because you spent time waiting for a plot to reveal itself to be interesting, or imagining what the plot might eventually be. I don't want to give the impression that I hate the game because it is offensive in some way, but I should note that this is probably one of the most sexist games I've ever played, and I have like hundreds of porn games on my Steam account. There were parts of the writing that make you cringe hard if you have eyeballs, and a big section of that is in the initial 30-hour period. Now, I know, like most anime fans, right, they want to fuck their sisters and argue on Twitter about why bestiality and rape are not that bad, so I'm sure the falling on deaf ears with this one. And I'm sure that it's telling about how little they give a shit about this kind of thing. But there was a moment of clarity for me, in an otherwise gray and monotonous first 30 hours, where nothing particularly good or particularly bad happened. There was this first part where I was like, wait a minute, this isn't just mediocre, this is like actively bad. I can tell that this is actively bad. The game continued to be generally boring and uneventful for the next 20 hours after that. I got my first official ending, which I'll talk about in a minute, and that ending was, like, fine, okay? I felt fine about the game, and it certainly wasn't, like, good or impressive in any way, but it was, like, fine in that moment. It's not particularly good, but it's, like, a serviceable whatever. It concluded acceptably. Of course, I did not know at the time that that one ending that I got was essentially the only real ending. It's the only true ending. Now, I started collecting the other endings, and the game rapidly went from acceptable to probably the worst game I've played in years. So let me explain vaguely how these endings work. There are 100 endings just based off of decision points alone, most of which are binary, but not all of them. Reddit tells me there's no secret 101st ending. I have every achievement in the game, 100%, everything. So once you complete your final ending, you don't get anything. You don't really get anything at all. You just can put the controller down and stop playing at that point. Out of those 100 endings, there are about 50 or so that are literally pointless and add nothing to the game. They're just abrupt bad endings, basically, near the end of a branching point, seemingly added for literally no reason other than for them to be able to say that the game has 100 endings. There are about 15 or so main branches. I don't recall. I could count them. 10 to 15 main branches. So each of those main branches maybe has one or two like actual endings that I would consider. So that's how many like actual routes there are per se. Discounting all the things that are repetitive and bullshit. So, like, okay, if you look in the Steam achievements, there's only about, like, 20-something total hidden achievements. You get hidden achievements for collecting every ending off of a specific branch. And again, there are maybe only, like, 2 endings off of each branch that give you anything specific, and there's usually another, like, 6 endings that add nothing to the experience at all. But if you get all 8 or so of them, you get an achievement for doing that branch of endings. So, there are 2 endings in this game that kind of almost matter. This is where it gets really, really weird, and I'll have to talk later about how this game was made and why it's so weird. There are 2 endings that someone might argue are the true ending, although it's hard to decide which of the 2 you would actually consider to be the truer one between them. Let's call them A and B. Ending B is the hardest one to get, and it requires you to complete a bunch of the other routes already. Complete a certain subset of other endings all throughout the game, and play it a lot longer. It's part of a branch that is the only branch in the game that is locked behind requirements like this. Now, this ending B, it does not tell you every single major plot point in the game. Far from it. But it tells you a bunch of brand new plot points specific to this route that could be argued to tell you, that are arguably more important than the other ones. Ending B is also the one that seems to conclusively end the story, and, by its own logic, declare itself the endpoint of the narrative. The problem is, this route is anticlimactic and unspecial, and like every other ending in the entire game that is not ending A, it basically has nothing to do with the story that the prologue, the first 30 hours of the game, is about at all. Ending A, one of the endings you can access immediately, like we did upon hitting the flowchart, is the ending where all the game's effort went into, all the budget and effort. It has by far the most dramatic presentation, it has unique animated cutscenes, the most, what you would call emotional weight. It's the only route in the entire game with a unique final boss, okay? It's the only one with, like, a bunch of its own content to it. I would describe ending A as the main primary ending of the game, and it's the only one that feels like the fucking ending. Ending B is basically just like all of the other 98 endings in the game, just a lot longer, and it makes up its own reason why it's more important than the others, but it makes up that reason out of thin air. Ending A simply concludes everything in the narrative that was already set up in the prologue. Now, this is how we have to talk about this. This is how the game was constructed. The prologue was written by Kodaka, and Ending A is written by Kodaka, and a couple of the other routes, but not very many. Which is why they feel like they're part of the same story. That is not the case for the other routes. Now, we hit Ending A as our first ending, and it literally concludes the story. It solves every established aspect of the plot that was introduced by that point. So Tiny and I were like, okay, we did ending 1 of 100. Is there a point to playing the other endings? Because, like, we did it. We learned the things. We reached the conclusion. We don't have any questions that still need answered, or narrative problems necessarily that still need being solved. I mean, you could argue ending A is not necessarily a very optimistic ending. Kodaka does not like writing very optimistic endings, per se. Purely optimistic endings, I mean. So, it's an ending that involves a lot of sacrifice, so maybe another narrative problem is that we have to find an ending where things work out better, but that kind of gets thrown out the window very quickly. Now, we hit that first ending around 45 hours in, and I shit you not, all the way until we were 110 hours in. Over 60 more fucking hours, more than half of the time we had spent playing this nightmare. That entire time, the game never, at any point, establish that there was still anything left for us to do in the narrative. We had already hit the ending that solved the main conflict and answered all established mysteries. All of the other endings just deal with other dumbass bullshit that has nothing to do with the main plot. At best, the other endings provide alternate solutions to the main conflict that was already solved in Ending A, and at worst, the other endings waste your time with side stories that have jack shit to do with anything that was established as the point of the fucking story. The only other routes that make any sense to be included in this video game are the completely comedic routes that are not meant to be taken seriously at all, and thus don't have any weight on the actual plot. It was only at the 110-hour mark where we finally got even a hint of the idea that there was still something in the story that we needed to solve, and in retrospect that was just more false hope. Through all 70 hours of losing our fucking minds completing these pointless routes and endings, I was wondering, how did they want a player to play the game? Were we supposed to just hit one ending and then just stop playing? That would have been the right decision, frankly, after we got Ending A, since it's all downhill from there. But imagine if I didn't get the true ending right away. Then I would be stuck in this loop of getting these dumbass endings that dive into these pointless random side conflicts that have nothing to do with the 30-hour fucking prologue. And most of the endings that are not Ending A don't solve any of the main mysteries of the game. In fact, you can actually get Ending B without doing Ending A. You can get Ending B first, or before Ending A. And if you did that, even though you have to go through a bunch of other routes required to get Ending B, you still wouldn't have actually revealed a lot of the main plot points from Ending A that are exclusive to Ending A. The ones pertaining to the game that it was originally about for the first 30 fucking hours. Every other route just invents bullshit. Like, okay, Kodaka did the branch filled with sexual assault and rape and stuff, no surprise there, but some fucking other flunky on their team did this other branch, right? And then, playing the game, it really does feel like a game with literally no vision behind it, okay? The game was made, Kodaka did the prologue, he did the main route, the only one of the 100 endings that, like, has anything to do with anything, and then he's just like, they just split up the work. Okay, you can actually see this in the credits, and if you watch, like, any videos documenting, documentary videos from them working on the game, this is actually, like, they just, like, split up the work entirely, barely communicated about any of it, and were like, okay, you write whatever the fuck you want, you can do, like, I don't know, like, 20 endings, go, do whatever you want. And that's why they have no vision behind it at all. The story has no message, no goal, it's not about anything. The plot just goes in absurdly random directions, but not random in like an unpredictable way. I mean, the story just stops being about anything that it was already about, and instead is replaced with abrupt, pointless, and always completely half-baked cliché scenarios. Each route, the characters act totally different from how they are in other routes, because, again, these aren't each route is written by a different fucking writer, with, like, borderline no collaboration. The story has no objective and no focus. It's basically just a collection of half-assed sub-stories, most of which are insanely shallow gimmicks, derivative from mindlessly ripping off other more successful works, or just copy-pasting popular gimmicks from their previous games, but stretched out over an insulting amount of time. It is so fucking funny to me that in the interviews, Kodaka says that one of the main inspirations for this game, being made in this way, is that they were a team of scenario writers, which is such an insult to, like, all of them, honestly, considering that every scenario in all of these routes is probably the laziest copy-and-paste cliché garbage I've ever seen in my entire life. There is nothing original or clever about a single scenario creation. There is nothing detail-oriented, thoroughly thought out, nothing. This is one of the worst, cases of scenario writing I've ever seen. You get this extremely half-assed shitty killing game route, extremely half-assed shitty multiverse route, extremely half-assed shitty ghost story route, extremely half-assed shitty zombie route, etc. They have nothing to do with each other. They're constantly contradicting each other in how the world works, how the mechanics work, what is and isn't possible, how the characters behave, what they believe. And most routes introduce concepts out of thin air that break the entire plot and just destroy everything established in the prologue or in other routes. Imagine if every trope and gimmick you could think of from these creators' past works was just shoved into a plot with no rhyme or reason, just because what if we could just make the story just do that for no reason, and then no effort was made into fitting them into the universe or making them any fucking good. If I were to do like a compliment sandwich, the game didn't have to be one of the worst things I've ever experienced. The game basically goes out of its way to be bad. It's like it really tries so hard to be terrible. It forces itself to have 100 endings. There's no reason for that. It's not structured in a way where playing through multiple routes makes any sense, because there's no greater thing you're trying to solve that's connected or anything. It really is. They just, like, are completely unrelated. The main plot is solved via ending A. Every other route is just unrelated bullshit, and then ending B has, like, a handful of references to the other routes, to a certain, like, 4 or 5 other routes. There's no sense of consequence, so every ending that you complete and get further and further into building up those 100 endings, every single one you do feels emptier and emptier than the last, because it's just one out of fucking seemingly infinite fucking endings, so who gives a fuck what happens? Unless it's entertaining in its own right, which most of them aren't. So instead you have to artificially care about, like, the 79th ending where so-and-so character happens to die in this route. Who gives a fuck? Forcing itself to waste dozens of hours of your time for nothing, and forcing itself to split off into plot points appearing out of thin air, making no sense, breaking the universe. Not that the universe ever made any sense or seemed like a lot of thought, a lot of hard thought and planning was put into it at any point, but if the game only had ending A, no routing, no choices, and maybe increase the length of that route and hire a fucking editor, okay? Because ending A, like, really does just dump all of the plot on you in, like, a 20-minute period once you choose the right sequence of routes. Hire an editor to go over your shit, go back, spruce up your writing to be less bad moment to moment, spend less time just shoving in more fucking text to the script, and spend more time going back over what you've already written and making sure it's good, trimming the fat, like a fucking writer is supposed to do, like is required to make something even halfway decent. Stop prioritizing quantity over quality, and then the game would, like, not even be that bad. The cast of the game is okay. Some of them are terrible, but some of them are actually fairly likable and entertaining. It is not the least funny game I've ever played. The cast is mostly dragged down by routes in which they are written by different people and do not act consistently. The game is also just not a character-driven story, so the characters don't really contribute much to the plot, except in certain arbitrary parts where, like, they say that this character made something useful off-screen, even though the same thing can be done in any other route without that character doing anything. The only characters with any agency and any, like, core beliefs that drive any aspects of the story are Saray, Shoma, and Eito, who are probably the only decent characters in the entire game, and even then, they all have routes where they're written terribly, and, like, Saray gets cucked out of relevance in most of the routes. In the majority of routes, like, the majority of routes just broadly forget that over half the cast even exist. You'll constantly be hitting points where it's like, wait, that guy's still alive? I haven't seen them in the last 30 hours. Have they just not done anything? They've just been hanging out, not doing anything? 30 hours, I meant 3 hours, but you get the idea. I'm not trying to exaggerate. When I say things like 30 hours, I'm not exaggerating. Those are accurate numbers. Anyways,
anytime that there's even a bit of character-driven conflict, it's manufactured to hell. They just make a character act incredibly unreasonable and contradictory just to make something happen. The other characters suffer from being completely innocuous bystanders. None of them have any real beliefs. When Takumi makes totally opposite choices, they don't care, they don't voice their own opinions, they just go along with whatever he says. Even characters I thought I liked, and I guess kind of generally like, fell down in my esteem and my respect the more it seemed like they don't actually have their own opinions on anything. They're just window dressing that only exists to, like, pop in and say mostly unfunny lines. But the point is, the cast in a pure vacuum of moment-to-moment entertainment can be likable depending on the quality of their fucking lines, I guess. When you ignore the fact that the overarching story is random and hollow and nothing and bullshit, sometimes the game is drunk movie night bad. I would say the game has a few main offenses. 1. It's cringe. All anime is cringe, so that is its lightest sin. This is like a dividing line for me. Like, if you have actual taste and you have, like, eyeballs and ears and stuff, it should only take you about 2 minutes of playing the demo of this game to tell that the moment-to-moment quality of the script is pretty bad. The script is bad, the character tropes are bad, the scenario tropes are bad, the world building is fucking lazy and stupid. Every aspect of the game screams that it was not made by people who thoroughly think through the elements they're imagining. They just kind of shit out their ideas, even though their ideas are just rip-offs of existing cliches in their most basic and simple forms. 2. The plot is stupid and broken to the point that there are no words in the English language that could ever express how stupid and broken it is. Saying that the game has plot holes is like saying the Earth has a couple teaspoons of water on it. There isn't even the slightest attempt to make any level of narrative consistency in this game, or adhere to established rules or concepts. They make shit up on the fly in the most fucking absurd ways I've ever seen. Usually when a game has a lot of plot holes that I can objectively prove, like, let's say, a 13 Sentinels, right? Okay? The fans are just like, yeah, okay why that character did that, but agree to disagree, bro. You're not getting off the hook with this one, okay? If you ever argue that the plot isn't the product of a fever dream, if you ever insist that it has even the slightest amount of logical consistency, you need to be fucking institutionalized. I hope you learn how to tie your shoelaces one day. 3. The game is meaningless. It has no overarching goal. There's no core conflict the story is about. Each route just shoots off to about random bullshit. Each ending only serves to make each other ending mean less and less and less. Unlike other route-based games, where other routes contribute to some sort of shared understanding of the story, or toward some sort of final true ending or whatever, in this, each ending just serves as another example of why none of the consequences of any ending mean anything at all, and why the game should not have been made like this. I've never played something that has such a vacuum of weight or purpose in my entire life. It really seems like they came up with this idea and never critically thought through how it would work, or played through the game to see if it worked. Even Ending B, which some people would consider the true ending and the hardest one to get to, is pretty much just basically another random side story. It has jack shit to do with what the story was originally about. All of the routes contradict each other. Other than the comedy routes, none of them serve a narrative purpose. They exist for the sake of existing. They exist so the game can say there's 100 endings. They exist because hack, fraud, piece of shit directors just want to shove in every fucking trope the tiny fucking peanut brain could think of from their past games in the laziest, lowest quality way possible. 4. The game actively hates you and insults you and your time. Any game this stupid is automatically an insult to your intelligence unless you are so stupid that there's no insult that could possibly demean lower than your intelligence already is, which is the case for most anime fans. But the part that's insane to me is the audacity for the creators to think that you would enjoy subjecting yourself to so little value, sometimes negative value, for so many hours. Like, okay, Baldur's Gate 3, right? It'll probably take you 100 hours to complete a playthrough. I'd say it has maybe 500 hours worth of real content in it. Probably more than that. The game has enough actual this game, 100 Line, has enough content to maybe fill 30 to 40 hours of a game. It has no more narrative complexity, emotional complexity, or gameplay longevity than that. And yet, this game will probably drag on for 150 to 200 hours for most people, unless they just fucking quit playing, which I imagine many will do. You just watch hours and hours of basically the same cutscenes, where the characters say basically the same jokes, and have the same conversations over and over, since you have to deal with the same things in many routes. I would say 80% of the text in this game, once you've completed like 6 or so of the endings, is totally pointless and adds nothing. For the gameplay, the actual combat itself is fine if poorly balanced, but whatever. It's mindless enough I don't hate doing it, even for several hours on end. But the way the game is designed, by which I mean I doubt there was a thought spared to the actual structure of game design ever, and the game was created just by slapping the first idea they had together with no editing or critical thinking. But the way the game is, you just get stronger and stronger forever, like any other RPG. But the combat does not evolve with you, because you could get any route in any order. So the first route that you get has combat in it, and then every route that you get afterwards has very little combat in it, with some exceptions, but even if they do, you are so fucking jacked the fuck out from all of the fights you already did, and the auto-fight wins, and the XP you just keep gaining, that no combat levels have any degree of effort to them anymore. The last few upgrades that you get for items or character skills or anything are always the most broken and overpowered ones. The last few upgrades to potions make them hysterically broken. The last few upgrades to skills increase base damage, which is completely broken. So the game has gameplay for maybe the first 60 hours. Maybe. And then the remaining 100 hours or so still has all of this time-wasting bullshit that you can't avoid. Free time that exists, like free time and exploration, mainly exists so that you can get stronger. But you've already done all the meaningful combat in the game, and you've already overpowered to the point that nothing matters anymore. Instead, it's just an unfathomable waste of your time that you have to wade through for hour upon hour upon hour upon hour upon hour for the next 100 hours. I am not exaggerating in any way, in any capacity, when I say that this game has the content to fill a 40-hour game. But instead its actual length is 150 to 200 hours. And it is that insult to your time. Okay? That 40-hour figure is me including everything I would consider to be functional content, even bad content, in this game. That is all the effective comedy, that is the entire plot I am including, that is a whole route's worth of gameplay, which is most of the gameplay. Everything included is maybe 40 hours worth. And me saying that it has the content of the 40-hour game is including all the parts in the story that I believe should not have been added in the first place, like basically all of the routes that have nothing to do with what the story is supposedly supposed to be about. Most are just rehashing the same scenarios, situations over and over long past, where even the dumbest worm on this planet could tell themselves that it matters. The game is filled with constant sources of time wasting, long animations you can't skip that play hundreds of times throughout the whole game, sections of gameplay you can't skip, despite having done the exact same thing hundreds of times, gameplay that you can skip, but it still takes like literally 2.5 to 3 minutes of fast forwarding through the same animations every time, multiple times over 100 routes. And then on top of that, somehow they just say fuck it, they put in literal time wasting parts into the game just for the sake of itself. They add sections to this game that literally only exist to waste hours of your time. For instance, there's a route where you do a battle almost every day for 50 fucking days. And there is no story or anything to it, you just do legitimately 7 hours of battles. And those are battles you actually can't skip, regardless of what you've already done before. And the gameplay is not more compelling or anything, it's not unique battles, you basically just fight the same weak mobs over and over and over again. Nothing compelling, nothing new, you're not an exaggeration, 7 hours of battling just because these fuckhead developers felt like it was something they could add in, and they did not spare the slightest thought in their brains for whether or not they were what they were shoving in would be a worthwhile experience for a player. The more you play of the game, the less you get out of it each hour that grinds by, and even from the start, it's like there's maybe 5 minutes of worthwhile content every hour or so. Just more repetition. More boring horse shit. Everything is arbitrarily made to waste more and more of your time. So, okay, for comparison, I've made videos, a bunch of videos about how 13 Sentinels is not that good. But 13 Sentinels is a massively different situation to this game. 13 Sentinels is a game that's custom built to appeal to the fact that anime fans will entertain themselves with their own fanfictions. So even though the game is obviously just taking a bunch of dumbass, illogical plot twist cliches and shoving them all into the same story willy-nilly, with whatever excuses they can come up with off the top of their heads, chopping it all up and jumbling it around so you consume most parts in a random order, it manages to create a seedbed where they stroke their own imaginations by coming up with theories and whatnot. They mistake that for writing, even though they're basically what the game is. It's just a sandbox with nothing but generic sci-fi cliches, and they entertain themselves by making up their own story in their own heads and thinking of all the sci-fi cliches they can think of. And then, like, the fake autists get a ton of satisfaction from this basic pattern recognition. So they cream their pants whenever they get a plot point that connects to another plot point that they already saw before, no matter how basic it is and no matter how stupid it is. They lack detail-oriented thinking, and they also lack big-picture thinking. They only operate via Skinner box, right? Monkey see star shape, monkey see star-shaped hole, monkey thinks storytelling is masterpiece. They aren't critical or detail-oriented enough to think about how every aspect of the plot is broken and filled with contrivances and plot holes. They can't think big picture enough to recognize how misguided the entire story is, and how in a broad sense nothing happens and nothing matters in the plot, and how the game is just a slapped-together mess of shitty tropes and reductive rip-offs. Ultimately, it's a mystery plot-focused game where the mystery and the plot are fucking stupid as hell, and a toddler can understand that it's nothing but contrivances. But if you are not critical enough to recognize that nothing makes sense, and you uncritically accept each piece of information you're given as though it doesn't contradict anything else, and as if it's not the stupidest thing you've ever heard, and if you have some sort of memory-related, like, brain damage that makes it so you can consume the exact same plot twist as 100 other sci-fi stories that you've seen before, and still go awooga like you're experiencing something surprising and original, you could enjoy the simple pattern recognition, the simple Skinner box pattern recognition of putting related piece of data together in your brain. Anime fans tell themselves that they are analytical because they do shitty theory crafting and use whatever brain-dead cliches they gravitate towards to imagine things, and because they see the thing that's beating them over the head and they perceive that as being savvy and attentive, but not because that they would ever recognize that 2 + 2 = 17 doesn't sound quite right. That is very different from this game. At least in 13 Sentinels, 13 Sentinels has, like, decent gameplay, pleasant art, good music. The overall experience created from this way of making the game is still relatively unique compared to other games. 13 Sentinels actually has a lot of plot points, so even though 40 hours I would still say is too long for it, it has a lot more plot than 100 line. It does, and 100 line is 200 hours long for no reason. There are reasons for an organism to enjoy 13 Sentinels. It's not even that bad. It's just incredibly stupid, and it does not deserve the level of respect that it's given for how much of an amateur hack job the story is. It's just needlessly bloated and very stupid and tropey. It is nowhere near the worst thing ever made by humans. And even then, you actually have to use your brain to notice the plot holes in 13 Sentinel. You have to go out of your way to think about the big picture and line stuff up. That is not the case with 100 line. You genuinely would have to beat yourself in the skull with a hammer every single day for your entire life to be dumb enough to not recognize that the plot is a complete fucking joke and there's nothing even resembling coherence to any of it. even the experience of playing the game isn't special or unique like 13 Sentinels is via its tone and its structure and its pacing and whatnot. 100 Line is the emptiest, most generic VN shit you have ever played in your life. Nothing but lazy, reductive anime cliches for 200 hours and the occasional actually funny bit. 90% of it is empty filler. None of these numbers are exaggerations, they are precise measurements. On very rare occasions, there are funny bits, okay? But if you have the sense of humor of a golden retriever with brain damage, you'll probably laugh at even more than just the funny bits. But there are parts that are funny that I can't decide if they're meant to be funny, and there are parts that are funny totally on accident. Basically, any scene that is telling you plot points is like the funniest part of the game because it's so fucking stupid. And even then, with some parts making for like drunk bad movie night funny content, the game was still almost entirely just hour after hour of nothing. Soul-crushing emptiness, pointlessness, boredom. Again, you have to actually be fucking brain dead in every sense of the word, genuinely sitting there slack-jawed, staring at the pixels, the lights flashing on the screen, while telling yourself that you are playing a video game. The biggest problem, narratively, is the scenario, because all of the routes are made with no planning and no shared vision by different writers that don't have the same skill sets, with poor communication. The scenario is completely incoherent, it has no logic and no structure, because all of the characters live in an unstable, broken scenario and are mostly at the whims of whatever dipshit idea the script wants to take place. There's almost no capacity for characters to feel like they're believable. Because the scenarios are so stupid, you would have to insult your own intelligence and your entire fucking lineage to pretend to take them seriously. Even if we just take the parts Kodaka wrote, which are relatively consistent with each other, with the exception of the route where Takumi just rapes all of the women just because he can. Kodaka's parts are probably the only sections of the game that resemble a coherent story with a reasonable vision behind it, and even then the game suffers from a lack of competent world building, a lack of the game's narrative and functional ability to convey the scale of anything, and a lack of effective pacing, and a lack of compelling plot points. Now, frankly, it's pretty obvious when someone has run out of ideas for their stories, run out of twists. So all of the twists or surprises are just plain cliches that he has used before in the most boring way imaginable, with much less effort than previous appearances of them, and with much less of a sense that it's a parody of these cliches. It's also clear that the game lacks the philosophical capacity to explore its own scenario. The only thing the game has going for it is the fact that it's catering to an audience of anime fans who are famously uncritical thinkers, and who famously don't have a cell in their body that can sense quality or purpose. They just see the name Kodaka, and they've basically already decided for themselves what their emotional response to whatever the game is going to be. And the other thing that the game has going for it is the fact that it is so fucking long that most people will just invent false hope that it will get better, or that it will have a point to it, or that it will tie together in some way, entertaining themselves on potential of what they consume rather than the content itself. So long as they haven't finished it, they can engage in copium where they assume that the game totally has something later on that will complete or justify the experience. They can even take this imaginary potential they think the game may have and interpret that to mean that the game they're currently playing has strong content in it, because they're morons. Not knowing the plot, or otherwise not having the mental capacity to remember and then think critically about the plot once you've experienced it, are pretty much the only defense mechanisms that can protect the game from the hatred that it rightly deserves. I mean, I keep trying to find the justifications, like what fucking mental gymnastics could be involved in saying that this game is good after playing even more than half of it, but the reality is, you actually just have to be lobotomized. Like, you have to be completely lobotomized and just sit there, dead eyes, staring at the screen, not a single thought in your skull, and once it's over, you just go on Twitter and say it was good. Even if you aren't offended by how bad the game is, like, Tiny and I were pretty fucking numb by the 70-hour mark. I was just working through it, you know? But if you can stomach the boredom and the pointlessness and you don't care about writing enough to care about how bad it is, even then, at best, it's a series of flashing pixels on a screen. There is literally no conceivable reason for anyone to ever think that a single aspect of the game is good, or well-designed, or impressive, or commendable. The game is literally just lazy cliches funneled into a Frankenstein script. A dog could have written the same thing. You have to recognize that this is the work of a middle schooler, alright? Indistinguishable from middle school work. You don't have to be motivated by hatred like we are. But the idea that you could look at something with literally zero redeeming qualities, or even the slightest hint of effort or artistry, and the worst conceptual ideas to make a game ever fucking posited, and then somehow claim that it's good, you are clearly subhuman. You are an actual fucking slug. Literally too shit for brains to ever even comprehend the shared reality we supposedly occupy. You are a fucking brain in a jar minus the brain. I genuinely have no means to express how fucking stupid you are to even say that you like this. What could you possibly offer the world besides carbon dioxide? Someone in your life needs to take away your phone and get you the help you need. If there even exists a treatment for such an incomparable degree of brain rot. It's fucking sad to look at. Miserable worms happily stuffing their faces with shit and piss and every manner of filth. Not only content, but so delusional that they feel proud of the fact that they eat literal shit. Knowing this is the state of so many people's brains is more depressing than any fantasy story about the extinction of humanity ever could be. Tasteless doesn't even begin to describe it. You are a living, breathing insult to anything good and worthwhile in the universe. Your opinions are about as valid as people who go on Twitter and argue on behalf of fucking their pets. You can't be considered a sentient creature under the laws of gods and men. The fact that you exist darkens every aspect of the world. Joy, laughter, love, life, and the pursuit of happiness. Your comprehension of reality is so disconnected and backwards that you challenge the very notion that these immutable concepts could even exist. You single-handedly reduce the basic value of human life by the fact that the concept supposedly includes you too. I feel shitty physically and mentally every day I wake up and remember that you exist. I genuinely feel that life is less worth living because I know that you exist. All of the time and effort I've put into the arts and sciences in my entire life to appreciate a greater depth of divine meaning, only for you to stroll on in, knuckles dragging, slobbering drool, to act like this worthless piece of fucking trash is something special. You exist purely to drive the world in the opposite direction of where it should go, where concepts like truth, beauty, intelligence, creativity, and any other virtue should actually be respected and aspired to. Just a slab of shit-smelling meat that somehow you learned how to use a keyboard. Your lack of basic self-respect and your total disregard for personal standards are a corruption of the dignity of the human soul. The state that your melted sludge of a brain is in should be studied in medical journals as a freak diversion of the natural course of Darwinism and properly documented as an affront to the natural law. You will never understand how stupid you are. Eternal hatred of anime fans.
So you can get the idea of what the Haitian Revolution turned into, because it's fucking awesome. I'm going to read to you the Haitian Declaration of Independence. This is just some transcripts. It is not enough to have expelled the barbarians who have bloodied our land for 2 centuries. It is not enough to have restrained those ever-evolving factions that one after another mocked the specter of liberty that the French have dangled before you. When will we tire of breathing the air that they breathe? What do we have in common with this nation of executioners? The difference between its cruelty and our patient moderation, its colors and ours, the great sea that separates us, and our avenging climate, all tell us plainly that they are not our brothers, that they never will be, and if they ever find refuge among us, they will plot again to trouble and divide us. Look there for your children, your suckling infants. What have they become? I shudder to say it, the prey of these vultures. Let them tremble when they approach our coast. If not from the memory of those cruelties they have perpetrated here, then from the terrible resolution that we will have made to put to death anyone born in France, whose profane foots soil the land of liberty.
Damn.
Fuck.
Yeah.
What a fucking declaration.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. The final line, let this be our cry, anathema to the French name, eternal hatred of France.
Yeah!
Base, 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 base.